In the early 1960s, in an effort to track down the source of cosmic X-rays, a pair of suborbital sounding rockets were launched from White Sands, New Mexico, with detection gear aimed at the stars. This led to the discovery of Cygnus X1, the largest X-ray source in Earth's sky, and subsequent observations led to the inescapable conclusion that something incredibly massive but invisible was siphoning matter from a supergiant blue star and emitting a fountain of X-rays. In other words, the discovery of Cygnus X1 was the first time scientists had ever found a black hole. Before that, black holes were considered a mathematical curiosity, first proposed well over a century before Einstein's theory of general relativity made them seem not just possible, but probable. For those who don't know, a black hole is, very generally speaking, a point in space so massive that it produces enough gravity to prevent anything material, even light itself, from ever getting out of its pull. Once one was finally located at the relatively close distance of 7,000 light-years, it stirred not just scientists but the general public as well. Somewhere out there, within cosmological spitting distance, are Lovecraftian monsters capable of swallowing everything in their path, including the Earth, the Sun, and every speck of dust in our solar system, and once one of them has you in its clutches, there can be no escape. Whoa, 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 whoa.
While exploring deep space, the small crew of the USS Palomino have found the lost vessel the USS Cygnus just outside the event horizon of a supermassive black hole. On board, they find the sole surviving member of the crew, Dr. Reinhardt, who is studying the giant celestial monster with the help of his crew of robots and automatons, including the terrifying Maximilian. While Dr. Durant believes in Reinhardt's mission, the rest of the crew quickly comes to realize that things aboard the Cygnus are not what they appear to be, and before they can unlock all of Reinhardt's grisly secrets, he sets the entire vessel on a collision course with the black hole.
Despite popular belief that it was conceived as yet another Star Wars ripoff, the black hole started its journey to the big screen long before that, and it was originally intended to be a disaster movie, ripping off the Poseidon Adventure and the Towering Inferno, that just happened to be set in space. The concept, Space Station 1, in which an enormous space station drifts into the gravitational pull of a black hole, came from the writers Bob Barbash and Richard Landau in the early 1970s, and according to them, it featured more than 200 characters dying, albeit in non-violent ways, and it featured a robot protagonist. Under the stewardship of Ron Miller and Winston Hibler at Disney, the project frequently slipped into development hell, but was never fully abandoned, even when Hibler retired, came back, and then passed away. The title changed to Space Probe 1, and then The Black Hole, and original writers Barbash and Landau were phased out while a bevy of other writers took passes at the script. The version that made it to the screen was primarily written by Jeb Rosebrook, with one final doctoring done by Jerry Day. Miller, who was Walt Disney's literal son-in-law and heir apparent, and would in fact become the president and CEO of the company, wanted to push the envelope a little and expand the target audience to include a slightly older demographic. While Disney had wanted to tone down the more adult aspects of the original concept and preserve its legacy of only producing G-rated films, Miller always intended to make a PG movie. To direct the picture, they first hired John Hough, a British filmmaker known for The Legend of Hell House and Escape to Witch Mountain. Hough loved the concept but hated the script, and at some point during the project's many setbacks and delays, he stepped away to work on other films and was replaced by Gary Nelson, a veteran of television who had recently directed Disney's Freaky Friday, the original Jodie Foster-Barbara Harris version. Throughout the decade, the scale of the project grew, and almost from the start, it was obvious that it would become Disney's most expensive live-action film to date, with an initial lowball budget estimate of $6 million, surpassing the $5 million of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and roughly matching the price of Mary Poppins. However, the budget wound up going as high as $20 million by the time it was finally finished, which doesn't even account for the extensive marketing campaign and merchandising push. A lot of money went into pre-production alone, which included pulling the award-winning production designer Peter Ellenshaw out of retirement and creating the proprietary Automated Camera Effects System, or ACES. Those new cameras then started rolling on The Black Hole in early October 1978. This episode was voted on by my patrons. If you'd like to vote on future topics and get early access to videos like this one, consider joining my Patreon or becoming a channel member. It's been a constant struggle to earn money through YouTube with its flawed copyright policies and tight age restriction guidelines, and your contributions are what keep this channel going and keep my wife from making me find a new hobby. I'd like to quickly shout out my $8 androids: Batty Bat Firebrand, Chuck Poor, Diane McGill Davis, Don Quixote, Giffen Chumley DDF, Jack Blair, John Burrell, Mike O'Connor, Numinous 2019, Patrick Baker, Robert McGill, Sean Vale, Spoats, TB Schromick, and Warren Davis. Thank you so much for your support. When it came to the cast, the most important role was Dr. Reinhardt, the mad scientist alone on the Cygnus with his automatons. Envisioned as a spoof of Werner von Braun, indeed the name of the robot, Maximilian, comes from von Braun's middle name, a lot of big names were considered to play him, including Peter Cushing, Herbert Lom, Christopher Lee, Donald Pleasance, and Max von Sydow. The role ultimately went to the coincidentally named Maximilian Schell, well known for his performances in Judgment at Nuremberg, The Deadly Affair, and A Bridge Too Far. The second most important role was that of the female lead, and indeed the only female in the movie, the psychic Dr. Kate McCrae. Nelson initially considered a then-unknown Sigourney Weaver, who reportedly had a good audition, but the casting director rejected her solely on the basis of her unusual name. Instead, the role first went to Jennifer O'Neill. In the lead-up to filming, she was required to cut her hair short because of the zero-gravity scenes, and she reportedly got pretty drunk to get through the haircut before driving home and getting into a bad car accident. Remember kids, don't drink and drive.
When friends drink too much, even in galaxies far, far away, friends don't let friends drive drunk.
To replace her, they briefly considered Linda Evans, but ultimately gave the job to the Time Machine's Yvette Mimieux, who didn't need to drink copious amounts of wine to get her hair trimmed. The rest of the cast was made up of known but not too expensive actors, including Anthony Perkins as Dr. Durant, Robert Forster as Captain Holland, and Ernest Borgnine as the reporter Harry Booth. The lesser-known Joseph Bottoms plays the hot-headed Lieutenant Pizer, and both Roddy McDowall and Slim Pickens provide the voices of the robots Vincent and Bob, respectively.
Are there any more like us left on board?
I'm the last one. These upstarts think I'm some old freak.
They still haven't improved on our model. We are the best.
Lastly, this unmasked drone is a cameo from director Gary Nelson. Filming was done over 9 months in late 1978 and early 1979, with the production taking up all 4 stages at Disney's Burbank studio. During filming, the actors weren't given complete scripts, so as to keep the ending of the film a mystery, and there were 2 units working without the knowledge of what the other was doing. They also separated the effects into 2 teams, one for special effects and one for special photographic effects, which is roughly equivalent to the modern distinction between special and visual effects. The Cygnus was built into 3 brass miniatures, one at a 1/4-inch scale and the other 2 at 1/16 scale. altogether costing $250,000 and taking 9 months to complete. In addition, there were approximately 150 different mats made for the movie that were filmed with yet another proprietary system designed specifically for it, called quote-unquote matte scan, that itself cost another $100,000 to develop. The titular black hole was made by high crank filming a clear 6-foot by 6-foot tank of water with a whirlpool of various lacquer paints, combined with additional mats, something called a diffusion glass, and black velvet, all filmed through an anamorphic lens to give it an elliptical shape. Meanwhile, the robots, including the Chernobog-inspired Maximilian, were fully mechanical, with no human inside. Quick clarification, these robots are in fact men in suits. And the opening title sequence was the longest computer-generated sequence ever made up to that point. The Black Hole released the weekend before Christmas 1979, to pretty negative reviews that praised the effects but little else. Despite a very promising opening weekend, it had a relatively quick fall-off and only grossed a little under $36 million domestically, which Disney considered a financial failure. It did well on home video though, and probably eked out a small profit in the long run. However, it wasn't nearly successful enough to help the fiscally precarious studio, which struggled to find its footing well into the 1980s. As a result, it has a reputation for being one of Disney's biggest flops, even though it technically didn't flop. It also didn't really change Disney's trajectory, and once Ron Miller was fully in charge, he continued to push for more adult films, leading to the development of Touchstone Pictures, and more experimental sci-fi films, leading to the groundbreaking Tron. As we all know, Disney did eventually recover from its slump with the so-called Disney Renaissance in the 90s, and now it produces more sci-fi films than ever, largely due to owning Star Wars and Marvel. The Black Hole, in defiance of its bad reputation, has remained a cult classic and has inspired plenty of other films, most notably Event Horizon. There was a reimagining of the movie in the works a decade ago, but it was shelved for being too dark and too similar to Christopher Nolan's Interstellar. For my money though, this is exactly the kind of movie that needs a remake, because it's a flawed film with a massive amount of untapped potential. Because here's the thing, The Black Hole came out at exactly the wrong time. While it inevitably gets compared to Star Wars, though personally I think it's closer to Star Trek, it feels like it belongs to the period just before that, in the sci-fi era of Logan's Run or Silent Running. It toys with darker themes, has a more metaphysical ending, and is paced a lot more like a pre-Star Wars blockbuster. The effects are by far the film's greatest strength, and they would have been even more impressive if Disney had beaten Industrial Light and Magic to the punch, even if only by a few months. As I see it, if the movie had come out then, it would have been far, far more successful. That said, I can't lie to you guys. The script is a mess, the characters never feel fully realized, the first act is a slog of bad technobabble.
Gravity pull.
0.02450 and rising.
Put us in an escape attitude of 85 degrees. Cut power by 2/3.
And the science is laughably terrible, even for the time. I respect the movie's intentions, love the pioneering effects work, and have a certain degree of nostalgia for it all, especially John Barry's beautiful and dramatic score. But looking at it today, I wouldn't feel right recommending the movie to anyone without warning them of its flaws. It also doesn't help that the story is constantly reminding me of better movies, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or Forbidden Planet, two movies it clearly takes inspiration from. And I think therein lies the problem. It spent so long in development that it never found its soul, went through so many rewrites that the original idea was lost, and its competing visions were forced to compromise so much that the story became derivative and the characters never became real. For example, Dr. Reinhardt only comes across as a pale imitation of Captain Nemo and Dr. Morbius, not a character in his own right, outside of one improvised line that hints at something more we never get to see.
Protect me from Maximilian.
I'm not saying the towering inferno in space would have been a groundbreaking original concept, but it's hard not to see how it would have been a better movie than the one we got. Therefore, the black hole is an important milestone, a landmark reminding us that once an idea gets sucked into the gravitational pull of studio politics, it never really escapes. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. What do you think of the black hole? Let me know in the comments, and while you're down there, don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons. Thank you for watching, and until next time, when we'll witness the start of the most gargantuan cinematic rivalry in history, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love. As long as you're not hurting anybody.
There are three basic types, Mr. Pizer: the wills, the won'ts, and the can'ts. The wills accomplish everything, the won'ts oppose everything, and the can'ts won't try anything.
Well, do us all a favor, Vincent, and try to be a can't.